to the Weekly Bioanalysis, a KCAS podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the 33rd episode of the Weekly Bioanalysis, the official podcast of KCAS Bioanalytical and Biomarker services. KCAS is a bioanalytical CRO serving the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries for over 40 years. My name is Dominic Guarino, and I have been in the immunology and gene therapy space for over 26 years. I'm here with my co-host, John Perkins.
Hi, my name's John Perkins. I've been in the bioanalytical space for around 26 years with a focus on LC-MS technologies.
So John and I are senior scientific advisors at KCAS, and either or both of us are available to answer any questions you may have regarding this podcast or any of KCAS services. For those of you that are new, I'm located in Kansas. John is in upstate New York, and our producers are in Missouri and Kansas City, so we're scattered all over the map to deliver you this wonderful podcast. We are thrilled to have you listening to us for the first episode of 2021. With the new year come many updates and a few changes for the podcast. First of all, there are many new listeners joining us because our producers have informed us the podcast is now available virtually everywhere. We're on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and many others. Wherever you choose to find and play your podcast, you can now likely find the Weekly Bioanalysis. And of course, all of you who continue to listen to the podcast via YouTube, it'll be there as well. But we welcome those of you that are joining us for the first time that are using any of the new platforms. One other quick update we want to mention was a bit of a change we will be implementing in 2021. As many of you know, if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, we start the podcast with COVID restriction, which prevented us from continuing business as usual. We were unable to meet face-to-face, but we wanted to continue to communicate with all of you. The podcast was an idea we'd always had, but it suddenly became the perfect media for us to employ. With the possibility of an eventual return to normal sometime this year, we needed to consider the likelihood that both John and I would need to once again make ourselves more available to our customers. So after a few discussions with the KCAS leadership and our producers, we made the decision that the episodes of the Weekly Bioanalysis will be published every other week moving forward, beginning with this episode. Don't worry, this will not affect the show's content or format, only how often we are publishing episodes. As always, the podcast will be a review of the latest news and resources, and then a focus on a topic of our choosing before discussing any feedback we may have had. We're constantly looking for topics, and we'd be happy to discuss something that you may want us to cover. Then we'll wrap up with a little teaser for next week. So, John, before we jump into the news, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you're looking forward to in the new year, and maybe even just share if you got any Christmas gifts.
Well, Happy New Year, first of all. It's great to be here as the first podcast of 2021. What I'm looking forward to this year is the hope that the vaccine and therapies in development, the vaccines authorized and the therapies in development will enable us to get back to normality where we can, routinely visit friends and family, and my wife and I would both love to be traveling again. So that's where we want to be. And we really need everything resolved by November so we can go to Jamaica for my son's wedding. In terms of Christmas presents, Christmas was a really nice, lovely family occasion.
John, I echo your Happy New Year to everybody. And if you think of a gift, you can chime in. I'll share. I have a family reunion scheduled for July of this year that I'm hopeful we can make, and that'll be in the Jersey Shore area is where we're going. So that's something for me to look forward to in 2021. We really, like you, John, I haven't vacationed anywhere, and it would be great to just get pampered a little bit. And then in terms of Christmas gifts, I got a couple things I want to share. First and foremost, John, I got a mic stand, which is why I come so crystal clear to you today. So hopefully in 2021, any of my mic issues will be resolved. The other thing I got, get this, the wife got me a pizza grill for outside. It's called Uni makes it, and it's a wood burning stove. It's a miniature pizza stove for my, it uses wood pellets, and it goes on the deck. So John, pizza time is back in 2021.
Have you tried it out?
Well, unfortunately, it's back ordered, so I don't have it quite yet. So it's coming. She was so sad she couldn't give it to me, so she got me gloves. They sell gloves for it. They sell some starter, some material to start it with. These little balls up of like thatch that are good for lighting the wood pellets. And then she got me like a one of the flat irons to get the pizza in and out. But I don't have the stove yet. It should be here in a couple of weeks. Stay tuned.
So one of my friends got one of those, I think about maybe 6-8 months ago, and posted some photos on Instagram. And I was thinking, oh, that's a great idea. We should move forward on that. But I haven't actually done anything about it. So I look forward to your verdict on that.
Oh, yeah. If you ever do get here, I promise to make you some, John. If you ever come back to Kansas City, I think I'm going to make like 8-10 pizzas, maybe.
Sure. So on the cooking front, in terms of presents, my wife got me one of these shortbread stones, which is it's basically, you make shortbread and it's fitting into a porcelain mold to then put in the oven, and if you then turn it out, it's got imprinted thistles and stuff.
Oh.
So we're big fans of shortbread, so it's like one of those things I have to try out when we finally get the new oven installed, which is slowly inching forward because the electricians have finally been able to contact the inspector, who is then said they couldn't do anything until they had, I'm trying to think, more details from us, which we gave the electricians. They then contacted the electricity company, who said they wouldn't authorize turning off the electricity until they had our account number. So I've given the electricians our account number, and it's slowly getting there. Still have no idea when these things are going to be installed. And this is now, we are now 4.5 months since the oven went out of action.
Yeah, John, we could put a man on the moon, but you can't get an oven installed, right? So, by the way, we're in the middle of our intro, so let's move on from this. And it's great to be back. It's great to hear your voice on the air here. But, John, why don't you kick us off with the first news item?
Sure. As it's a new year, I thought it would be good to start with something that really shows the good side of people. It's actually a pre-Christmas article, but it's talking about lockdown kept lonely fans at home, so their teams went to them. This is actually a New York Times article, but it's talking about the English Football League. And if you don't know much about English football, the teams started to be established around the late 1800s, 1870, for the very first football teams. Then progress from there. But pretty much every town in England has one or two football clubs, so they're a hugely important part of the community. So when it comes to football matches, it's not so much as seeing a team sport. It's actually a chance to socialise and mingle with your friends who you've seen week after week, month after month, and year after year. And of course, and this is even more timely post the new year, because the UK has just announced a further lockdown. But in the previous lockdown, what it meant with the football season being canned, that social interaction was taken away from people, particularly those without families and older people, etc. So this is a big loss for people. It has obviously an impact on how people deal with lockdowns, etc. And so what the English Football League and a lot of clubs have figured out ways where they could actually reach out to fans to keep them connected to the club, and through the community. And the article cited a lot of clubs such as Bristol Rovers, Portsmouth and Exeter City providing food deliveries and community work. Plymouth, Bournemouth, Watford and West Bromwich Albion phoning fans directly. You had Keith Curle at Northampton Town, who's the actual manager of the team, talking to fans directly. Teams building databases of fans over 70 so they can contact them. So it's a wonderful approach to sort of keep people connected and ensure that they don't get lost in the lockdown. Actually, it, to some extent, actually helps, keep a lockdown happening, because then people aren't tempted to go out because, they know they have some contact that is meaningful to them.
Yeah, John, this is a great story. It's all we've talked about how COVID is impacting individuals in terms of depression. In this article, they've delivered over 640,000 parcels of food, 29,000 personal protective equipment, and 5,200 prescriptions. This is a great uplifting story for not just England. It's happening in the U.S. as well. There are many teams. There's always a turkey drive, John. I don't know if you knew, football teams always give out turkeys, but even here in Kansas City, there's been the Chiefs and the Royals and teams like that. Even Sporting have gotten much more into the community, and this is a great story. John, question for you is I did see stands. Some clubs have fans in the stands, some don't. With the recent changes, are there no more fans allowed in English football?
So we'll be at the no more fans stage. So yeah, I mean, we talked a few weeks ago about Hereford going tier one, so they could have fans attending. They had a couple of games where they had fans in, but now it was Monday this week that actually Scotland announced lockdown until the end of January, and then England announced lockdown to the end of February. And I will touch more on this later as part of our main item. So this, if you're in lockdown, that's it. There'll be no fans. We'll be back to the stage. So all the tiers that we were talking about over the last couple of weeks, they've been scrapped because now everywhere is in lockdown. And like I say, there are things I want to talk about this later. So the fans are done. The other part of it, and is actually seems to be an increasing number of cases where teams are actually getting increasing numbers of players tested for COVID or tested positive for COVID. So I'm not sure that the season's going to finish. There's been quite a few announced over the last few days, and again, I think this plays into some stuff I want to talk about later. But like I said, this was a great story in terms of what a community, something that is central to the community, is doing to help the community get through this. But ultimately, the way things are progressing, it may be taken out of their hands.
Yeah, and John, we'll end with one club hired a chief loneliness officer, which I think is really clever, and they were bringing iPads and stuff to people. But a great story,
Yep.
and something we'll touch on in another. I believe we're going to talk a little bit more about this in another news article. So, John, continuing along the same lines as how soccer teams are trying to combat depression, the next news item is actually from GoodRx and how COVID-19 is worsening behavioral health conditions. This is not a big surprise. They found that a lot of people are falling into a depression and anxiety sort of state. There, what is it, 63% increase in pharmaceuticals for prescription for depression and anxiety. Just not surprising. I think it's happening quite a bit. I hear about it. I feel like I even have some family members that are falling into this category. I feel like as this continues to linger and there's thoughts of a second sort of strain out there and even more lockdowns, you can just, it's palpable how people are starting to get stir crazy. And let's hope that with the vaccine coming around, we can have maybe perhaps start to move in the right direction. But John, it's not surprising to be reading that GoodRx is finding that people are increasing their meds, right?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, our daughter is a counsellor, and when she graduated, this was one of our discussions. This was going back to last May, that with people being either locked down or isolated, or just unable to do all the things that you routinely want to do, it has a knock-on effect to mental health, etc., and particularly for individuals who are already vulnerable. So to have this put in writing isn't a shocker at all. I mean, I think it said that the prescription fills for depression and anxiety medications reached an all-time high in 2020, and there's also concern about lack of motivation to eat well and exercise can then lead to further obesity and diabetes and diseases like that. So it's not just mental health, there's actually other long-term medical conditions that are concerned here. And it also says, and I'm definitely party to this, people are turning more to alcohol and recreational drugs. And we certainly drink more wine than we would have normally. I think when people were back over the holiday, we had a chat about what do you find most difficult about this. And I think within my family, it's a case of there was that ability to just go and do what you want to do on a particular day that has been removed, and because that flexibility is taken away from your life, it certainly negatively impacts how you think through things.
Yeah, John, a couple of things I really want to highlight. One is the number of nobody needs anything to motivate them from eating healthy and exercising. So that's just they said nearly half are struggling with that. I suppose that's probably even higher. And then the other thing that's impacting is people are not treating their standard illnesses, right? That was
Sure.
something we
Yeah.
talked about
Yep.
early on, and that's becoming. They said about 20% are having trouble with their standard illnesses. So this is one of those things where let's hope that the vaccine is the cure, right? So, or at least getting us in the right direction.
Yeah, it's the vaccine and other therapies. We hope that we can get to them quickly to really turn this around, because I think the mental health piece will linger. So I think that will be a long-term issue that needs to be addressed, and the sooner we can get that return to near normality, the better.
Yeah, it'll be a struggle, and well, it sounds like your daughter is helping out in this space, John, and that's a good altruistic profession she's in. So hats off to her and anybody who's helping with people that have depression, which is, I think, running rampant. So John, let's move on to our next article, right? The ethics of continuing placebo in SARS-CoV-2 vaccine trials. And John, this is a big one, right? So
Sure.
everybody wants the trial to be safe. Everybody wants it to be effective. And so part of doing that is to dose people with the vaccine and dose some without it. But, in immuno-oncology settings, they quite frequently, after, a couple patients have gone through the process and they see efficacy of the drug, they will switch them onto the drug. It's a little bit more challenging here, I think, John, but from our perspective, it probably makes sense to, I don't know, I'm torn by this one,
So,
John.
so
I'm a
yeah,
little on the fence.
yeah. So basically, what we have 3 vaccines in emergency use application around the globe, and then actually, I was reading earlier in the week that Sinopharm's vaccine has actually been approved in China, so it's the first officially approved vaccine. But obviously, you need placebo arm to really test the safety and efficacy of a vaccine. If we didn't have those volunteers who are given placebo, we wouldn't know about the efficacy of those vaccines that are being rolled out right now. Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna both claim that they have an ethical obligation to offer the vaccine as possible to those volunteers, but as part of their sign up for the trial, they weren't told beforehand that if they were given placebo, they would switch to the vaccine. This was never part of the condition of being a volunteer on the trial. And so this was the JAMA, and their viewpoint article says, really, in the interest of continuing science, so you can really assess the long term implications of the vaccine, you do need people to stay on the placebo arm. But our recommendation would be that if someone meets the criteria as they currently stand, because right now we're talking rolling out to healthcare personnel, other essential workers, adults with high risk medical conditions, and adults age 65 years or older. If you're on placebo and you are actually in one of those categories, then it does make sense to switch you to the vaccine, but try and retain people who are outside those groups on placebo for now until they become of a group that is next in line for the vaccine.
Yeah, John, I think it's a real challenge. We don't have the answers to it, but some
Mm-mm.
other stats here is they estimate about 21 million healthcare personnel need the vaccine. So if they continue with the current practices, about almost 37,000 would not be getting a vaccine. They'd be getting a placebo, right? So I don't know. It's I don't envy the people who have to make these decisions, and good luck to them. And we'll certainly keep a pulse on it, right?
Sure.
So as we move on to our next article, could a lymphoma drug work better against COVID-19 than our old friend remdesivir, right? So, John, that there's always lots of therapeutics in the pipeline. We as an organization are working on many of them, but tell us a little bit more about this potential therapeutic that could be more effective than remdesivir.
Well, I think it's actually so. This was a study done at the Chinese Academy of Sciences Shenzhen Institute of Advanced Technology, where they actually used computational modeling to look at a number of candidates to figure out how well could they work, and they could they be potent remedies against SARS-CoV-2. They actually found that a drug called pralatrexate more strongly inhibited the replication of SARS-CoV-2 post their modelling when compared to remdesivir. Their initial screen using computer modelling basically identified pralatrexate, azithromycin, amoxicillin, and then a Gilead drug, sofosbuvir. Azithromycin and pralatrexate both showed inhibition of SARS-CoV-2 in cells. I think this is a really useful study, but it's of limited practicality because they're not really sure that although pralatrexate could show efficacy in cells, is actually very toxic. So it may have limited, application when it comes to the real world. But what they were really aiming to show was by applying multiple computer models, they came to a more finely tuned approach at identifying good candidates to address the virus.
Yeah, no, it is, but it's an important step towards therapies, right? This is the type of work that we're gonna.
Not knocking this at all. You're absolutely right. It's important. It's just it's indicative of all the different approaches that are being taken by researchers to figure out how can we best address this. So it is a really nice. It's a nice exercise. I am not minimizing what they've done at all.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that, John. I wanted the audience to understand that this type of approach, these using AI, all the tools being used, and we've talked about that. It's fantastic that they're using artificial intelligence. They're using drugs from multiple companies, and all those companies are helping to participate. This is the stuff that's going to get things that we're going to continue to monitor here on this podcast, but these are the stories that should make everybody who's listening feel better. There is many, many different approaches towards treating this, in addition to the vaccines. But these types of therapies are where we hope to see 6 months, a year, where there's just a battery of drugs that can be taken to get you in and out of the hospital quickly if you do come down with COVID, right? That's the goal. So great stuff, John. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit more about vaccines, right? So AstraZeneca and Oxford snare UK clearance for their COVID-19 vaccine. And if we remember, this was a lead candidate when we first started talking about vaccines. It hit a little bit of a snag and a safety hole, but it's overcome that. And now it's approved in the UK. And John, again, this is just, everything's moving in the right direction, in my opinion. So happy to see that, AstraZeneca and Oxford have broken through and gotten approval.
Yeah, so this is it is our third EUA. So again, it broadens the arsenal of vaccines that are available to help account to the virus, and it's got better stability characteristics, so it does help with distribution. So we're not reliant on the freezer chain to help get the vaccine to where it needs to be. It also isn't as prone to losing its efficacy if it's outside a certain time frame from a certain temperature. So it's a good addition to the two we already have, and there'll be more to come, because obviously J&J shouldn't be far behind, and several
Novavax,
candidates. Right? Yes.
Yeah. So, and Novavax is behind. You're right. There's the article mentions how several more are coming behind this one, but then it also states how our friends at the Serum Institute of India are going to produce a whole bunch of these for AstraZeneca.
As part of this, the AstraZeneca one has been approved for use in India. So we talked about it a few weeks ago, where India had refused to take it forward, but they have since, updated their decision, and it's approved in India. And the Serum Institute of, obviously, I talked about them months ago about how big their production facility is. They are key to getting the AstraZeneca vaccine produced.
Yeah, great stuff, John. Great stuff. So we're going to switch gears, right? We're going to move away from COVID. Let's talk a little bit about a non-COVID topic. And, if you've been watching any TV, which unfortunately I think all of us are doing more of, but pharma TV ad spendings blow up December with spendiest month of 2020. So the pharma industry shelled out $217 million in advertisements. Most notably is AbbVie and Humira, which is the number one selling drug in America. John, not surprised by all of this, and for me personally, I think it's good that the pharma industry is, capitalizing on the momentum. And although there was a little bit of a shift, and I don't know if you saw as a sidebar how there is some crackdown on pricing coming up as well here in the U.S. But anyhow, great story, and they even list the 5 or 6 drugs, or
The
actually
top
top
10.
10, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure. So yeah, the top 10 range in 11.7 million over the month, to obviously the 45 million that AbbVie spent. I wonder if this actually includes the ads that I know AbbVie were placing out that weren't naming their drugs, but were highlighting conditions that you really needed to go and talk to your doctor about, which again touches on what we talked about with GoodRx, where people are letting the normal medical treatment or conditions slip while they're dealing while we're dealing with COVID. And I know AbbVie were definitely behind a number of those ads. I've seen all four. I think there was 4 they did for 4 different conditions where they didn't name their drug, but we knew it was behind it. And I've
yeah,
seen all 4 of those. It's really interesting to me. You look at the total spend of the total spend was 200, just short of 220 million in December. I'd love to talk to someone at a drug company and see how effective that is in terms of what return they get from TV advertising.
yeah.
It's a
Well,
really interesting topic, and particularly I'd love to know what the message is, because they have to list the side effects, how people react to that litany of side effects at the tail end of a
yeah,
of a
yeah.
of an ad.
I don't know. I imagine if there's, well, who knows? But I think it's probably worth the investment. A
Oh,
couple of
sure.
key ones that Keytruda and Opdivo, who are the anti-PD-L1s, they come in at 6 and 7. I didn't realize this. Keytruda didn't even make the top 10, but actually Opdivo, which is the BMS version of it, Keytruda is the Merck. These are PD-L1 inhibitors, right? And so that one moved from 2 down to 7. But in general, John, the other thing that I see a lot of ads for is the pharma industry itself is putting out ads. I don't know if you've seen those where they just say, they show a bunch of scientists in lab coats and they talk about how they're fighting the vaccines and all that stuff, and then it's just a general I think it's called pharmaceutical scientists or something like that is putting out ads as well.
I
So
would not.
yeah, not a big surprise to see that spending is up, but those are, every time I see some of those commercials, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy to be part of that. And then they show all the logos of all the companies, right? They
No,
show,
no, I do like to see them, and I love to know, what they're for, who's producing them, and everything else. I'll frequently be there sitting on my phone googling the drug while the advert's on. But I am not on any of these drugs, so I'm not a target market. It's just intellectual curiosity. But I think part of it is a reflection. And this plays on to the next news item. The pharma industry is actually they they have they have a healthy revenue balance at the moment. And so this is fueling speculation that 2021 mergers and acquisitions will be big news. This really, the first flag was way back, I think around September time, when Gilead purchased Immunomedics, and that was with an eye to getting their immuno-oncology drug, Trodelvy. That was a 21 billion purchase, and then the biggest of the year was actually AstraZeneca saying it would pay 39 billion for Alexion. And so there was another couple of other acquisitions towards the end of December, but I think the trend is likely to be that mergers and acquisitions will be big news this year.
yeah,
Um,
no,
yeah, so as companies look for bolt-ons to basically give them a wider range of therapies to go after, and then we've talked about. We've talked about companies like, I think we touched on Bayer buying a couple of gene therapy companies, which is a hot area, and that's really what we're likely to see. Where with the science is being driven by innovators, then big farmers are likely to move in where they think there's real potential.
yeah, John, this is all good signs for those of us in this type of industry. You're right. The 39 billion that AstraZeneca is putting out for Alexion is an unbelievable amount of money, but that is the it's driving the future here, and there's a lot of speculation that as we get out of this, we're going to get more mergers and acquisitions as we get more face to face, right? So as we start to people, the article touches on in the coming months, we want to ditch the Zoom meetings and actually shake hands. We should also look. Lilly also made news, right? They spent just $1 billion, but John, $1 billion still a lot, right? For Prevail Therapeutics, so they're in the game. All your big players here are going to be, I would imagine, moving and shaking, and I think 2021 will be a historic year for M&A.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You talk about the Lilly purchase again. Prevail, it's a gene therapy company, and increasingly there's more and more gene and cell therapy in the news, and yeah, large pharma are going to be going in that direction, but
Yeah.
they're going to have to buy expertise to go in that direction.
Yeah, and there's the good news is there's lots of what I'll call small biotechs that are in the gene therapy space. So even though you see some of these being purchased, I think there's 5 sprouting up in the gene therapy space throughout the country, and almost every medical center is into the gene therapy space, and they all have a handful of companies. So it's not like we're going to lose all of our small biotechs. In fact, these acquisitions, I believe, actually drive hope and pump even more money into small gene therapy companies.
Yeah,
So
and it's often the case that the innovators who establish those companies may spend time with the buyer, but longer term they will spin out and set up additional companies, and so there's a definite pipeline associated with this. So it's all good for the industry.
Yeah, and they do touch on, we're not a political show, but they do say the election is somewhat, that's somewhat of a question mark, but I don't think it'll affect our industry much. Other industries perhaps, but I've always said back in, I don't know, 1994 when I decided to get into this, no one ever wants to cut immuno-oncology or cancer research. It's not a popular thing to cut. Yeah. So great stuff, John. Enjoyed that. It's good to get the first news and notes of 2021 behind us. And I think we got a fun topic today, John. It's going to be a light topic, right? We're going to talk about John, we ready to move into the main portion?
Sure. So, yeah.
We're going to talk about looking forward at 2021 for drug development, both COVID and non-COVID. And we'll just jump right in, John. The first is like the current state of COVID around the globe, right? So as countries successfully return to normal versus what's happening in the US and Europe, I think you got a little bit of a better pulse on this. So I'll let you kind of jump in here, but I find it somewhat, I don't know if depressing is the right word, but it's just not great to see lockdowns coming in the US, certainly what's happening in the UK. I mean, I was so enjoying seeing stands in the fan for the EPL and everything. And I know this week, I think they're on break this week, but there won't be anybody in the stands. I think that really impacts things. And even here in the US, we got NFL playoffs coming up, and I don't know, you probably don't follow it quite as much as I do, but in Buffalo, they're only allowing like I think it's a quarter of the stadium, and it's becoming a contention in terms of who gets the tickets and all this stuff. It's just such a distraction, some of this. But John, share with us how some countries are returning to normal versus the US.
So I started off, actually finished last year on a slightly depressing note, because I was, we were sitting around, I think it was in the afternoon, went on Twitter, and there were people in New Zealand ringing in the new year, huge crowd, where I don't know if it was Christchurch or Wellington or wherever, but like say, New Zealand have really the virus under control. I'm not sure when they last had a case. In terms of total deaths, they're less than 100. 25 deaths they've seen in New Zealand, but life there is back to normal. There's a number of other countries where it's really back to normal too, and so there's lessons to be learned from what these countries have done to really. It's depressing that the US and Europe, and so we talked about lockdown in the UK. Germany's extended their lockdown. Really Western Europe hasn't dealt with this well at all either. So this is not a knock just on the US, but there's countries around the globe. If you look at the Johns Hopkins site, the deaths really aren't that significant, and life. I don't know what all of them have implemented to counter this, but life is really much closer to normal than it is here. So, I mean, in terms of Asia, Laos and Cambodia have listed 0 deaths. Taiwan, 7 deaths for a population of 23 million. Vietnam, population 96 million, 35 deaths. And so Asia's large number of Asian countries have generally not been knocked that severely. Actually, Caribbean islands are doing reasonably well, although I will touch on Barbados as part of the UK and Europe thing. And even a number of African nations have seen, sub-Saharan Africa, they've seen deaths less than 100 people. So I'd love to know what the difference is in terms of cultural, how we treat it versus how these other countries treat it. I have some thoughts on the UK. But I read a Twitter thread where it was someone had travelled. I think they're British, but they live in South Korea. They travel back to the UK for like the Christmas period, and basically just strolled out the airport. For them to go back to South Korea, and they really were talking about their South Korean experience. Even though they were resident in South Korea, they had to go through the full quarantine experience. Which, I mean, I think they were almost 24 hours in the airport going through various screenings before they were then allowed out to the quarantine hotel, where they were kept really closely watched until they got through the 14 weeks to then go out to their own house. So they were a resident, and this is how South Korea works at it. And so, just as a direct comparison, South Korea with the UK, I mean, South Korea's population is 51 million, UK 66. South Korea's death rate has been 1,046, and the UK's death rate is 77,470, and they had the highest day ever yesterday. So when the UK says it's going into lockdown, yes, the lockdown involved closing schools, but didn't involve closing nurseries. They still haven't implemented anything in terms of controls for people coming into the country through airports. It's so. Somehow countries like the UK have to look at what other countries have done, learn from it, and implement it, rather than have this sort of lax switch of here's what we're doing this week, here's what we're doing this week, here's what we're doing the other week. It's so haphazard that they're never going to get it under control.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a couple things that come to mind with because a lot of it, even Japan isn't having nearly the issue of, say, the UK. So you would think it might be an island thing, but that's clearly not the case because the UK is an island. I think part of it is a couple things. You wonder about testing in general, right? But maybe maybe it's a little bit of both. Those countries are maybe under testing and under reporting the number of COVID deaths and even COVID infections. And maybe over here in the US and UK, we might be over reporting it, right? So, and I'm not going to go down that path too much, but if a 90-year-old passes from kidney failure and they're COVID positive, they're falling into a COVID positive death. So, but not being said, it's still something that clearly is causing and still is some deaths due to COVID. The other piece is the sheer, I would imagine the sheer traffic in and out of the UK is probably log scale higher than, say, Korea, right? Just in terms of general movements, which is surprising. I'm surprised probably. I hadn't even thought about it. There's probably people running into Europe all the time and still people flying around here. And I'll have one more point, John. There is going to be, I envision you're going to need a very almost you're going to need a vaccine card to travel, right? Or not a vaccine, but a negative, you've been tested for COVID and you're COVID negative type of card. So I don't know, John, it's an interesting phenomena and certainly impacting not just the US, but the world all over. And you did say something that struck a chord with me. We do really have to start to look at what's being done there and trying to adapt some of it so that we can prevent this.
Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly touch on the South Korea thing because that's why I raised it. I mean, I'm not sure how many major airports there are in South Korea. Obviously, Incheon is the big one at Seoul. But I never realized how big Seoul was and it's a huge city. So there'll be a lot of people coming through there. there, and obviously there'll be travel all over Asia, same as there is from the UK out to Europe, etc. For the UK, you're really talking 5 or 6 main airports. So you get Gatwick, Heathrow, Manchester, Glasgow and Edinburgh are small. Birmingham's fairly small, and then you're talking more regional airports. But ultimately, all of those airports have had customs control in place, so you have that slow filter of people into the general airport, regardless. So that
How about the
infrastructure
tunnel,
is
John?
there.
Right? They're not monitoring, going under the English Channel in the train there.
Well,
So maybe there's
they
just
do,
more
yeah,
inlet,
absolutely
right?
do. Yeah, absolutely they do. Yeah, because that was already there. You would have passport checks, etc., to go on the train under the channel.
Yeah, but I mean,
And
it's been a
ferries
year.
should be the same.
I had the pleasure of doing it a long time ago, but it was definitely not to the degree of an airport, right? Or you think
Sure.
they're making sure? Is it more an airport? Is you have to provide proof, and then using the tube is more around the hey, you need to sign this and say you haven't been in contact. Again, I don't know the answer to that, but I would imagine there's not the resources to prevent it on the train side of things, but maybe
I think,
there is.
but I should. But on the so the I don't want to spend too long on this, but for the Channel Tunnel, it is passport control either end, so you could do checks either end. So that as an entry point into the country, you could do it that way, and the ferries are similar. But the point that this person was making, the UK isn't doing any of that.
Ah,
Whether it be airports or Channel Tunnel or ferries, it's just not happening at all. People are coming off a flight and going off out into the population as usual.
oh, okay. Wow.
So
I
that's
think that's happening here in the U.S. too, though. So I don't know. There's nothing.
I,
Yeah.
I've not flown in the US since March, so I honestly don't know what's done here, and I haven't seen anyone saying what happens when they come into the US. I'm just talking about what I do know is going. I've seen that observation about the UK multiple times, and it's also acknowledged by the government that they're not doing anything in terms of screening people as they come into the country.
Interesting, John. So, where do we want to go next, John? Where
So yeah, I suppose that I put this barriers to returning to normal, and I think I think that some of this is cultural. I think there's a couple of articles talking about the UK or people from the UK, and I wonder what goes on through people's heads. One of these I don't know if you saw it, that there was a case in Verbier, Switzerland, with 370 UK travellers were quarantined for 10 days from December 14th. Switzerland announced that they had a travel ban with the UK on December 20th. 350 of those 370 people ran away and basically disappeared. So I don't know, and so they broke quarantine, and then the authorities didn't know where they were. Had they gone to try and get on flights, or had they gone to France, or what? That's what I struggle with, that kind of attitude.
yeah,
And then,
that's
and then coming back to Barbados, I mentioned Barbados earlier, and Barbados so far has had very few fatalities. I think they've listed 7, but I only found out about this because I saw someone post on an Instagram where they said they'd gone into lockdown on December 31st. They cited one example, but as I dug a bit more, there was actually one super spreader event that basically started from a Boxing Day bus crawl, and then the case that this other person on Instagram cited was that a contestant of Love Island who is basically vacationing in Barbados, their boyfriend tested positive for COVID, and while she was waiting for her test result to come back, they decided to make a break for it to the airport to try and fly back to the UK, and basically break quarantine that way. And they actually got stopped at Barbados airport, and she was fined, etc., etc. But that's indicative of some of the problem that you're dealing with. If you're trying to get this under control, people have to take quarantine and things like this seriously. I don't understand. why people say I want all you to quarantine, but it doesn't really apply to me because I don't feel like it.
Yeah, John, it's like the old adage: a law keeps an honest person honest, right? All these restrictions, I don't know what the number is, 99, 95, 90%, but most of us are adhering to it. It's those that are doing these risky things or just defying the recommendations that's causing this to linger or to spike
Sure.
or to
Yeah.
expand. Because I assure you, here in the Midwest, um, we are not nearly as restricted as the coast. I've got some family in Massachusetts that I talk to frequently, and they're like, no, I haven't seen a waiter or a waitress in, I don't know, 10 months, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But here, and especially in Kansas City, and by the way, I don't think our numbers are off the charts or anything. Traffic is back to normal, John, right? It's almost
Sure.
like some
Yep.
normalcy here. I mean, and it worries me slightly that people are wearing masks. I know me, if I'm out and someone starts to get in that circle, I'm fortunate enough to just, look at them and say, you need to, we're not practicing this anymore. And they see me and they kind of get away from me. But everywhere I go, I keep that sense of like, I'm wearing a mask, don't get too close to me. And I can perpetuate that just from, I don't know, the vein that my wife says pops out of my head. And those that don't know me, I'm a 300-pound guy, John, right? That makes it a little bit easier, right? So I don't know how or why, but it's a hard thing to see. And there's been a handful of places we've walked in and been like, nope, and walked out
Sure.
because it's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
wall to wall people. And I'm like, man, it's something that, well, I think hopefully the vaccine will help to curb it. But I don't know, John, there's no great answer here. And certainly, I don't expect, yeah.
Yeah, so let's move on to the vaccine because I think it is. I want to keep this flowing. So yes, obviously we have the three vaccines that are approved for. Not, they're authorized for use. They're not fully approved, but it's that building supply is tough, and the rollout hasn't gone as quickly as we wanted. But somehow we need to find a way to accelerate that. So I think the goal was to have 20 million people dosed by the end of December, and it was less. I think it was around 5 million. But again, this has been an issue in the UK and Europe as well. But if we're going to get back to normality and to counter these kind of what I would call selfish behaviours, we really need the vaccine rollout to go ahead. And this limited supply to begin with obviously has governments thinking about how they can address it, and this is why I thought it was worth moving this topic back. The UK has proposed holding off on the second dose of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Pfizer pushed back on it. I think the UK basically said we're pushing it back to a 12-week window. Pfizer said, but we haven't tested it beyond, I think, 21 days. Therefore, you really shouldn't be doing this. And then there was also the UK had talked about if you had the first dose of one vaccine, maybe you could follow up with a another dose of another vaccine if the second dose of the first vaccine wasn't available. And so that's been the UK's approach. And then obviously in this country, there had been efficacy seen for subgroup for the Moderna vaccine study. So there's potential talk of could we actually go with a half dose of the Moderna vaccine. So I'm throwing it back to you because this is more your topic, but this is some of the
Yeah.
background to where we're going.
So I think this is part of, so first topic is the Pfizer vaccine, where they're looking to delay the second one. And from what I can tell, they're actually saying it might increase. Instead of giving it at 21 day, instead of giving it at 12 weeks, that might actually increase the efficacy of the vaccine. So that one, as long as you get it, again, it's tough to say the second boost. It's technically a boost is how you can think of it, but the approach of getting this distributed to as many people as possible is obviously the best way to go. So
Sure.
I'm all in favor of it. And then as for the half dose, it looks like, these are pretty potent vaccines. They from what I read in this article, because there's an article we're referring to here that says the half dose of the Moderna vaccine is as effective. And that's not too surprising, John, right? So there's, it's not that I don't want to scare anybody and say, oh, we rushed this to market, but part of what was done is they probably did, and I'm speculating, say there would be 5 ranges of the vaccine. They probably limited it to 2 or 3. And so they went with one that is working, but was not necessarily optimized in terms of how low can you go. And as they start vaccinating people, what they're realizing is, oh, we probably only need half. And there's a lot of documentation that says individuals with half of the Moderna vaccine will get identical responses. So this is, it's not surprising that this is what's happening. I mean, when we think of this is a drug development show, we're talking about vaccines, which are drugs, right? And as we've condensed a upwards of a 3 to 5 year program into a year, these types of things, this shouldn't scare anybody. Don't be scared by what we're discussing here. These are the things that the nimbleness that is amazing. This is the nimbleness we want to see, the flexibility that you want to see to allow for coverage across a wider range of the population and without losing any sort of efficacy of the vaccine itself. And I think from what I'm reading, we need to be open to this, John, right?
Oh, I'm yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I think my concern when I saw the UK say this was where was this coming from? Because I've seen so many poor decisions taken in the UK throughout this pandemic. Was it being driven by politicians or was it driven by scientists? And if there are actually scientists saying this is a a good way forward or a potential way forward, then I'm interested. And actually, the more I saw more and more commentators saying this actually is probably worth exploring. So actually, my sort of anxiety level went down about it. So I think I'm open to it, and I think certainly the fact that Moderna have data from the reduced dose for a subgroup, that is worth exploring. So yeah, it's and this is obviously going to be a lot of the discussion going forward, and I mean equally we had the when we talk about AstraZeneca, there was that ambiguous data set where they had a subgroup that had been given a lower dose for the first injection and then went to the proper dose for the second injection that showed higher efficacy than the group that showed the same, that were given that high dose for both injections. So this is all part of learning about these vaccines while we move forward.
Yeah, and immunologically, that sometimes it's you get a prime and then a boost, and sometimes a small priming and a big boost is the way to go, and that's what you sort of described there. And this is where, but just for the sake of the health of all of the globe, we sort of weren't able to evaluate all of this, but that doesn't mean we can't continue to refine and improve. And again, this should not be scaring anyone. This should be encouraging that we're going to take the supplies that are out there and we're going to make it go even further to vaccinate more people. So this is quite, I don't know. I'm a big fan of trying to do this. And John, I want to maybe pivot a little bit. One of the things that, the distribution of the vaccine has been pretty poor, in my opinion. My sister did get it. She's a nurse in Massachusetts at a major hospital, and I know they're doing a pretty good job. She feels comfortable, but I have some local friends. You would think like police and those type of people would be on the list. They've got zero clarity if they're ever going to get the vaccine. And that kind of, I understand we want healthcare workers, but I feel like frontline workers like police and fire, they should be on that list too. So I digress a little bit. I think the distribution of the vaccine, due to how states are handling it, even cities within certain states, has been just horrible. Yeah. And it's been poor, and it's disappointing that we have more it's disappointing to hear of people that aren't frontline workers that just wanted the vaccine and they're in their 40s that got it. That just frustrates me. Sure. We should be frontline workers over the age of 70 or whatever it is, and then the rest of us. Like, John, what I'm saying is I think if I worked hard, if I looked hard enough and pushed hard enough, I'd go get the vaccine. I'm not going to do that, but we shouldn't be allowing that. It really should be for those that are at a higher risk. So I hope we can straighten some of this out. I would have thought we'd had more people vaccinated by now. I just think we got the challenge is you were putting a lot of pressure on politicians who know very little about this. So I'm not knocking them per se, but I think it's a very challenging quest, or a very challenging request we've had on people who are trying to figure out how to do this, and they're novices as scientists.
I do agree with that, and obviously the additional challenge we had vaccines that needed more tender treatment than what we're typically used to. So, I mean, I'd love to know what was done in terms of looking at the supply chain. I know we talked about this earlier in the week. I mean, we as a lab have -70 freezers that we could. I know they're mostly full, but I'm sure we could have found space to store vaccine if someone had asked us to. And so we've known this for months, that the Pfizer vaccine needs that cold chain storage. If I was approaching this, I would honestly have wanted to chart where the -70 freezers in any state, such that you have those. Then you'd say to the people who have them, can we use it to store vaccine to then help implementation? And we have chain of custody within our freezers. We're exactly the type of organization that could help with something like this.
Yeah, John, I think that's the biggest challenge. Is there's a lot of people who just simply, hospitals might have limited space, but you nailed it. There's just not enough -70s or -80s. There just is not enough refrigeration or freezers for them. And I think that's causing like the slow distribution. And I think probably what happens is you might lose your place in line, right? Like if you got 1,000 I'm making numbers up, but say you got X number and you were due to get another shipment, maybe you're turning it away because you don't have the room to store it. And that brings up another thing that's happening. People are thawing some of these vials, and then either people aren't showing up or they're not using all of them, and some of them are going to waste. I believe I read some story around that as being part of the delay is what I just said there. The inability to thaw and freeze and the instability of the vaccine is causing a lot of consternation from those that have to distribute it.
Sure. Yeah, I haven't read too much on that, but it doesn't surprise me. I mean, we knew this was going to be a challenge right from day one.
Or even like a lack of understanding. You're only going to give 5,000 vaccines today, but you pull out 10,000. Now you got to throw away 5,000,
sure.
Right? Absolutely. That type of stuff happening. If I wasn't clear, so I think we could talk about this agnostically, but part of what John, if it's okay, we're going to move maybe a little bit. What's next on your agenda here, John?
So I had likelihood of new therapies, and just wanted to mention that we talk about vaccines all the time, but there's a lot of active development going on, and we're working on multiple programs for new therapies for COVID. We were looking at 2021, and what we'll see is more of these drugs going into the clinic, and we'll hear more about these drugs as we go through the year. I think that's probably all I wanted to say about that.
I'd like to jump. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there. But in terms of therapeutics, the main area that I see older, let's just say repurposing of drugs, it's in the respiratory space, which is what remdesivir is. But I think there's many more effective respiratory drugs that can work, and innate immunity drugs, because that just knocks down the infection. So those that can block complement, those that can block like any sort of innate immune cells from overreacting if you do get an infection, because ultimately that's what you want to do. You want to knock the virus replication down, and you want to knock the symptoms down. So stay tuned. We're working on several of them in this space. They're wonderful drugs. Some of them are actually in like wound healing space, have been repurposed, because again, that's another area where they think when there's a lot of damage, that's when the virus can get in and aggress. That's why you're seeing, spot up with kidney issues and liver issues, because the virus knows it's smart, and let's leave it at that. So there's lots of, I think, very good therapeutics on the forefront. And so to the audience that's listening, there's hope, and don't get discouraged. In addition to the vaccines, there's a plethora of therapeutics coming out there to help with COVID. And John, we'll continue to monitor this as the year goes on.
Yeah, so I think to close out, we want to briefly, we want to touch at least briefly on the non-COVID drug development. As we've said multiple times, it's not stopping either, and there's going to definitely still be that continual focus on oncology. I mean, small molecules will be there, but I think large molecule and gene and cell therapy is really where the big news is going to come from. Although small may be the immuno-oncology side, where obviously we're looking at antibody drug conjugates. I think we're going to hear more on that front, but yeah, I think really large molecules where it's all going to be.
No, I think we're still going to be surprised by the number of small molecule approvals, and I do think there's a couple areas. I think the cardiac area, NASH and diabetes, as well as any sort of lung, what I'll lump into like cystic fibrosis or COPDs and asthma and allergy. There's still a lot of advancement in that place, and then, as you touched on, the biggest driver for small molecules will be what we call the payload on the ADCs, the antibody drug conjugates. So the biological protein-based antibody backbone with a couple different small molecule payloads on there. And really the advancement there is, before they used to have to put 6, 8, now they're putting 1 or 2, strategically locating them on the backbone of the antibody, and very, very potent and very, very effective. So that small molecules by no stretch are going to be dead in 2021.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I've been hearing from people for years that small molecule was dead because of the growth of large molecule, and I've never listened to it for a minute, and it's not going to go away this year either. There's still too much to be addressed, and when you look at if you look at the drug approvals from last year, how many small molecules there were, but a lot of them were developed to address unmet medical needs. So there's still tons of potential out there.
Yeah, and then if we switch over to the large molecules, which frequently we lump into gene therapy, because that falls into that category because of the immunogenicity risk, right? Like generating unwanted antibodies, or in the case of a vaccine, a wanted antibody, right? But those types of therapeutics we know are obviously monoclonal antibodies and ADCs are in that space, and the immuno-oncology is where the focus will be in 2021, as well as for gene therapies and even proteins. The rare and orphan diseases is where most of your gene therapeutic companies are really, they are really impacting that space, John. It's amazing. Sure. Yep. What companies like BioMarin are doing, and Bluebird and those types of companies with rare diseases.
I think the other part that we're increasingly hearing about is the RNA drugs, like Alnilam and Dicerna and all these RNA drug companies are increasingly getting things through late stage to submission, and we'll hear more about them too.
Yeah, Alnilam had their 4th approval this week as well. We didn't make our news article, but I did see that come across my desk, and you nailed it, John. The success of the mRNA vaccines will translate into mRNA therapeutics, and we're seeing that. So that's a good point, John. And mRNAs fall into that kind of in between space, right? That's how I kind of look at it.
And actually, that's one thing I do want to touch on very quickly. We haven't touched on it today, and I think it's something that will be a topic for our next podcast as more information comes out. But the new variants have been observed in terms of COVID, and I think for the B117 that was observed in southeast England first, I think when people looked at that, their thought was that the current vaccines would be able to deal with it, but then the variant that is emerged in South Africa, there was actually concern whether the existing vaccines were equipped to deal with that. But then people pivoted and said, but we can very quickly develop mRNA vaccines that can address the differences within that variant. So obviously there's a development time, but we can deal with it.
Yeah, I think it's a to be determined there. But one potential solution would be a cocktail, right?
Sure.
A combination of mRNAs, which again, obviously they can get there very quickly. As in terms of actual it's hard. It's so speculative at this point. But the latest I read was this new strain is somewhat it's more contagious, but less virulent or less deadly is what. But these numbers are so low, and I think they're so ancillary. It's hard to really kind of accept that sort of view this early on, right? It's a
Well,
small
yeah.
n number.
I think it's something for us to watch with interest. So I think it will be a topic to discuss in the future as we learn more, because it's still early days.
Yes, so John, this has been a very great discussion with you today. I've enjoyed our first podcast of 2021. We're running again a little bit long, so we're going to skip our feedback and questions, but we promise at some point we will get to our super fan who had a number of questions for us. John, before we talk about next week's topic, tell me a little bit about maybe whatever you want to say. What are you doing this weekend or anything in general?
This weekend, actually, we have nothing really planned for this weekend at all.
I've got some exciting news, John.
Then let's go with that, because
this is it's big news. I got to get a car for my 15-year-old.
Oh, okay.
So we have been John. I have spent a lot of time looking for a used car, and we don't want to just go out and get him, a brand new car. He's 15 years old, right? He's
Sure.
just needs to drive to and from school. What this buying a used car is one of the worst experiences I can go through. We have been to I don't know how many car dealerships. We had our eye on a vehicle initially. We went and viewed a whole bunch because we didn't just want to jump in and throw money at it. We went back to see the car of interest. And sure enough, as we're test driving it again, it started making noise.
Oh, wow.
So we're starting over, John. So the 12 hours I've spent last weekend doing car searches, I'm going to have to recapitulate this weekend. And well, this time we'll certainly bring more water and maybe more beef jerky and granola bars, because we know we're in for a long day, John. But buying a used car, I think we find at least we have a better sense of what we want. We were going to pull the trigger on this Ford Focus that we like, but we're going to pivot and we're going to look at a Nissan Sentra is what we've got our eyes on. So hopefully it won't take us too long this weekend, but we do have a couple we're going to go look at. But John, I don't know, your kids are a little bit older. This is just miserable trying to find a new car.
Well, actually, to be honest, only one of my kids drive. My eldest lives in Boston, so it's public transport everywhere, and my youngest hasn't learned to drive yet either. So, we haven't really had to confront that too much. But our only news is we actually sent out wedding invitations for my son's wedding, scheduled for November, assuming that we get everything under control.
Sadly, you'd think we would be. But yeah.
I try to be optimistic. I'm a glass half full kind of person, but I have to say this year hasn't been, having watched like various New Year things where I'm thinking, particularly in the UK and Europe, where things aren't under control. I'm sort of still tending towards the pessimistic side on that, but we'll see. Fingers crossed it all works out. But
yeah. Well, my son has been able to drive. So at 15, he passed all the things, and when he had his 15th birthday in September, but I think it was right around late October, he was eligible to drive himself to school. He wasn't in any big hurry because school's like a mile away, and mom loves it. But boy, it has been very nerve-wracking on mom watching him drive the car around. And he's a very good driver. I'll give him. We're very happy with how he drives, but I'm less worried. I'm still worried, but mom is like very emotional seeing him drive around, and the thought of him even driving the 1.2 miles to school and back has got her a little unhinged, a little nervous. So I got to deal with that a little bit, but she's good. She's a strong woman. She'll be fine. So John, that'll be my exciting weekend. Looking forward to podcast number 34, which will be 2 weeks from now. And the topic we plan to do is the top 10 manufacturers in the fight against COVID-19. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's been on a docket for a while, and hope it'd be nice to do it, but we'll see if something else takes its place in the intervening 2 weeks, because so much happens at the moment.
Let's look forward to continuing our delve into COVID-19, and we'll talk about the manufacturing fights. And it's a wonderful story. These manufacturing companies have been doing amazing work, and it'll be a fun topic to discuss in a couple of weeks. So any last thoughts, John?
None for now. Have a great weekend. I hope you find your car and at least you got one more thing off your list.
Yeah, stay tuned on that one. Take care, John.